Hey everyone, welcome to my second video of the Seven Kingdoms and More channel. Today we're going to be doing the Fire and Blood Hot D Greens Breakdown Part 2, so I'm excited for this video. Not as excited for my next video, which I'll share more about at the end of this video, so stick around for that. But this is again Part 2, which is I used more characters in this one because the three main characters I honestly thought were Aemond, Aegon, and Alicent. So in this video, we are going to cover Otto, Kristen, Helena, and Darren, and then also Larys Strong. So I wanted to use this art on this intro slide because it does kind of represent these characters' overall thoughts, feelings, and or experiences, I would argue. For example, Otto is thirsty for political power, and you can see him on the Iron Throne with his Hand of the King badge. Shout out to my sister and brother-in-law for getting me a Hand of the King bottle opener. I don't think you can see it very clearly. This is my Hand of the King bottle opener. And then we can move on to Kristen, who is violent, angry, malicious, and vengeful. As you can see, he's covered on, looks like a blanket of blood, you could even argue. I'm not exactly sure what's going on in that picture, but it does represent him very well. And then you see kind of Helena, where it's sad, depressed, melancholy, and you'll see that for sure in season 2, and we'll get into that when I get into her analysis. And then one of my favorite characters, Darren and the Daring, of all of Song of Ice and Fire. I love this guy, and you won't even see him until season 3, but he's awesome. He's young, he's slightly ignorant, and he's risk taking, and of course he's daring because he is nicknamed Darren the Daring. So let's go on to the next slide, excuse me. So the introduction is, again, it's the same thing as the first one. It's a character analyses as well as similarities and differences from Hot D and Fire and Blood. Again, I already talked about who we're going to be covering: Otto, Kristen, Larys, Helena, and Darren. And again, the character analysis will include personalities, actions characters took, and their overall experiences and similarities and differences from the show and the book. So let's get into it. Again, before we get into it, I really want to say this video will contain spoilers, Fire and Blood, and House of the Dragon, only for really season 2 and some potential mild season 3 spoilers. I really obviously won't be spoiling the end here entirely, but you will have season 2 spoilers and season 3 spoilers. And I'll try not to spoil literally every detail, just some high level things that honestly most viewers could probably guess. All right, so Otto Hightower. Okay, so the first point I have is he's conniving, politically focused, and manipulative, which is, if you've seen the show, it's pretty obvious. But on page 354 in Fire and Blood, it's quoted, "He is hated by others, and he did not deserve to be the Hand of the King." So you can kind of see that he's not really necessarily liked by his peers. It's partially because he's so competitive, and you could argue that he is malicious in certain ways. Otto's kind of like a light version of Tywin. I wouldn't say he's quite as cruel as Tywin. Tywin murdered the entire Rain family in a violent way, by drowning them out. I don't think Otto has that in him. And again, he's not entirely evil. He cares for his family, but again, it's kind of in a manipulative and reckless kind of way. We'll get more into that later. But basically, it's all he puts his family in a good position of power, but it's because of self-interest. And another quote I want to get out of the book for the readers is also on page 354, where this reads a lot into Otto's character. "Meanwhile, the tedium of the rule was left largely to the king's small council in his hand. Sir Otto had continued in that office, serving the grandson as he had the grandsire, an able man, all agreed, though many found him proud, brusque, and haughty. The longer he served, the more imperious Sir Otto became." So they're talking about how he served also Jaehaerys. So Otto was actually Jaehaerys's hand, and we'll talk about that more next slide. But basically, this is kind of alluding to how Otto is very able and he is competent, but he probably has some malicious actions in his mind, you could say. And another point that I want to talk about in terms of similarity is how he possesses a strong contempt for Daemon. It's pretty much the exact same in the book. They almost did that exactly the same if you read the book and the watch the show. So let me get to that quote that I really want to share about. Daemon. So on page 354 in Fire and Blood, it said the greatest of his rivals was Daemon Targaryen, the king's ambitious, impetuous, I don't even know how to pronounce that, and moody younger brother. So throughout the book and the show, it's pretty obvious that Daemon and Otto do not agree. And I mean, it kind of makes sense. Their personalities are totally different. Daemon is a warrior, wants to be on the battlefield, and where Otto kind of wants to play by the rules. And again, this kind of goes into like the faith of the Seven versus like the dragon religion of Daemon. They're just very different characters, and they strongly dislike is not the word. Hate is probably the word. And one more quote, more from the show that I want to share with you, just about Otto's conniving, politically focused, and manipulative ways. So Jasper Wilde in episode 9 says his firstborn son is hardly an imposter when referring to Beesbury. When Beesbury's like, "What's going on? This is a coup," and Jasper Wilde's like, "No, his firstborn son is hardly an imposter because that is kind of how it's been like in Westeros, especially with the Council of 101 AC." And that's how it's been. So Otto thinks that like that's how Otto thinks. It's his firstborn son is not an imposter. My grandson should be the king. But again, he put his Alicent and his family in a very particular position by striving for power. So let's move on to the differences. So the first point I have here is it's kind of a show and book difference. So Viserys rids him being king, but he suggests he may have killed Balon in the show. So in the books, it's alluded that Otto could have killed Balon, but it's not like super clear. Um, it's basically saying, was it a burst belly? That's how it's written down in the books. But again, the books were written by the Maesters. And again, there's a whole Maester conspiracy that I'm going to get into more in point 3. But was it a burst belly or something bigger at play? Show makes it seem like it was something bigger at play, where the book makes it seem like it was just a burst belly. But on page 343 in Fire and Blood, it stated, in 101 AC, Prince Balon complained of a stitch in his side whilst hunting in the Kingswood. His belly swelled and hardened, and the pain grew so severe it left him bedridden. Rensselaer, the new Grand Maester, only recently arrived from the Citadel. On his 5th day of his illness, Balon died. After opening the corpse, Grand Maester Rensselaer put down the cause of death as a burst belly. So this kind of leads into, we're going to skip over point 2 a little bit and go back to it, but this kind of leads into point 3, where the directors make it a little more obvious that Otto, Hightowers, Maesters, Old Town, all that power conglomerate are really the ones ruling the Seven Kingdoms, especially even practically by the middle of Viserys' reign. They're the ones ruling the Seven Kingdoms. Like, I don't know if anyone remembers from the show, because this is a very slight thing, but if you rewatch, you will see this, where Melos gives Otto a look when they're talking about Viserys marrying Lena instead of Alicent. They're basically trying to manipulate Viserys into marrying Alicent. That's what that look was for, and it feeds into the Maester conspiracy. And essentially, that I don't want to get too into the Maester conspiracy. David Lightbringer on YouTube has some good videos on that. You should definitely watch his channel. He has a great channel. But basically, the Maester conspiracy is not my theory. It's a lot of people believe it, so I don't want to get into a lot of detail. But it's basically saying the Maesters and Old Town and the High Towers basically started all of this with 101 IC to try and destroy all the dragons, because they realized that the dragons were and the Targaryens were too powerful and it would become chaotic. So they're like, let's create this 30-year plan to try and kill all the dragons. And this kind of feeds into that idea by Balon's death, who's Viserys' dad, creating more chaos, because Balon was a lot stronger of a character than Viserys. But he'd be a much stronger king. He wouldn't be as manipulated as Viserys. And again, going back to second point, it's possible that Otto is worse than we even think, right? If he actually did plot to kill Prince Balon, which it's alluded to a little bit more in the show than in the books, because it's written, again, in a slightly more favorable tone. Like, Otto's written in a more favorable tone than you see him in the show due to the Maester influences, because the Maesters wrote Fire and Blood. It's not like Game of Thrones, where it's all perspectives, like Tyrion and Sansa. It's like written third person by Maesters, so it's very different in that sense. So they do write Otto probably more favorably than they portray him in the show. So let's move on to Criston Cole. Criston Cole, what a guy. So yeah, this first point I have is pretty obvious. He is violent, resentful, angry. You definitely see that in the show. That's not like that doesn't take a psychiatrist to understand that. But it's pretty similar. So like on page 372, when we're getting into his violence and resentfulness and his anger, it does start with Rhaenyra, which we see in the show as well. So that is a similarity. So on page 372, it's quoted, he denied Rhaenyra's favor. Criston Cole turned to Queen Alicent instead, wearing her token. The young Lord Commander of the Kingsguard defeated all challengers fighting in Black Fury. So this was in a melee after essentially it is written in the books that Rhaenyra tried to sleep with Criston. Criston rejected her and then turned to Alicent. In the show, we see it as a little different, but it's the same concept. He turns away from Rhaenyra, resents her from there, and goes all in on Alicent. He does brutally murder Sir Joffrey. We're going to talk about that a little bit more on the next slide, and you'll see why. And a pretty important point here, he's called the Kingmaker, and you're going to hear that a lot in season 2 because he does put the Conqueror's crown on Aegon II, and that actually is a very significant moment. That's what kind of makes the realm take note of Criston Cole. I mean, you could argue they took note of him before, but that was a huge deal. And again, a season 2 prediction. It's pretty obvious, and from the trailer, he will become Hand of the King. And I did forget to mention Otto's season 2 prediction, but you all read it. Otto will probably die at the end of season 2. Again, this is my predictions. I can't guarantee anything based off the book, but Otto will probably die in season 2 when Rhaenyra takes back the capital. So that was another season 2 prediction. So what else is important? And then Criston turns to Alicent again. We talked about that. And again on page 40, on page 401, on the appointed day, Criston Cole placed the steel and ruby crown of Aegon the Conqueror upon the brow of the eldest son of King Viserys and Queen Alicent. So it's the same in the books and the show, and that is pretty significant. I don't think they wanted to change that in the show because Criston's going to become even more important, you could argue, in season 2. And again, you're going to hear probably them call him the Kingmaker in season 2. I almost guarantee that, and you never heard that before in season 1. So let's move on to some differences. So in the book, he's the leader of the Kingsguard for much longer, which may make him feel even more powerful, actually, in the books than even in the show. He was Lord Commander starting in like 113 because Lord Westerling dies. Like Lord Westerling would have essentially died in the equivalent of like episode 2 or 3. So that would have been like Criston being King, Lord Commander for like 7 or 8 episodes. So he was actually named after beating Daemon at a melee. And here's a quote from page 369 in Fire and Blood. Grand Maester Runciter and Sir Harold Westerling both died in 112 AC. Again, that would be roughly like the second episode. Sir Criston Cole was named Lord Commander of the Kingsguard in Sir Harold's place. So again, he becomes Kingsguard much earlier, which is a pretty big difference because that probably affects his personality more so in the book in terms of feeling like even more powerful and power hungry than he already is. And again, this is another important difference. So he did murder Joffrey in the book and the show, but he murdered Joffrey at a wedding, not at a melee. In the books, it was at a melee, and he just beat him pretty badly, which isn't, quite as sadistic, you could argue. So they're making him maybe even a little bit more evil, just like Otto in the show. So honestly, I would argue Criston and Otto look worse probably in the show than the books, and that alludes to the Maester conspiracy again. Another fun little factoid for you. Criston actually beats Harwin up in the same melee as Joffrey. So Criston has literally beaten Joffrey, who's a good one of the best warriors, Sir Harwin, the strongest warrior, and Daemon Targaryen, one of the best warriors. So Criston, I will admit, is like a total badass. He's basically like the Sir Arthur Dayne, you could argue, this time, but not like morally like Sir Arthur Dayne, much worse. But he beats Harwin in the same melee as Joffrey, excuse me, and you never see Harwin beat up Criston in King's Landing. That would never happen in the books. Which I guess is an interesting difference because I would argue the Maesters are definitely more pro-green and Team Green, and you never really see that in the books. So maybe they're alluding to Criston's strength over Harwin's. But on page 372 in Fire and Blood, it is stated, the blows he rained down on Sir Laenor's champion, cracked his helm, and left him senseless in the mud. Sir Joffrey died 6 later. In the same page, he left Breakbones with a broken collarbone and a shattered elbow, promoting Mushroom to call him Breakbones thereafter. So that's actually how he got the name Breakbones in the book. I think in the show they don't allude to that, so it could be a different reason. But we do know that Harwin is very strong, the strongest knight, and Kristen handled him, Joffrey, and Daemon. So he's he's a badass. Let's move on to Larys Strong. Okay, Larys, very weird character. I think we can all agree. He's very similar to Otto in a lot of ways. He's conniving. He's politically focused. He's extremely manipulative. He's probably more manipulative than probably even Otto, I would argue. I mean, I don't exactly know how you could judge that, but probably more so. He's self-interested, and again, this is an important point because it's said a lot in the books, and you very clearly see this in the show, so I wanted to point this out as a similarity. He's more of a listener than a speaker. He listens a lot. Like, there's literally quotes in the book of him just like not like just listening, and I'll speak to that later on. In the books, he's always a part of Team Green. It's pretty clear by like episode 5, when he talks to Alicent for the first time, that I am full-blown Team Green. Like, Larys is full-blown Team Green. It's pretty similar. They don't even really talk about it in the books, but he just has a kind of a strange relationship with his father and brother. Like, I think the only like interaction he even has with Harwin is that one thing where Alicent walks down in episode 5 with like the green dress, and it's like Harwin's like, "Do you know what flame the old town like I can't even think of the word tower, the old town tower has when their banners goes to war, and it's like green," and that's the only interaction. So just kind of a bizarre relationship. He's much different than Harwin and Lionel is kind of the point I'm trying to get at. And season 2 prediction is he will assist Aegon II and his children escape when the Blacks invade King's Landing. That's really important because he escapes with Aegon and gets his children out. And I don't think they're going to change that. I think that's too important because I think it shows how actually weirdly dedicated Larys is to Team Green, because I think he does have this strange dedication to Alicent, even though he is very politically focused. He is the one that gets the Greens out, Aegon's kids out, who are also important, Maelor and Jaehaera. And that I think they will not change. That'll be in the last episode. That's a prediction of mine. But here are some quotes on page 396. It is not recorded that Lord Larys Strong spoke a word during this debate, but that was not unusual. Though glib of tongue when need to be, the master of whisperers hoarded his words like a miser hoarding coins. So again, preferring to listen rather than talk. So George is making this very clear that Larys is a listener, and he's manipulative, and he's conniving, and he's self-interested. And you can even see this. He watches Lord Caswell in episode 9 and uses very few words when explaining with Otto, when explaining his relationship with Alicent. He's very, it's like confusing. Otto's like, what is your relationship? And that's about it. But I actually do want to quote my season 2 prediction out of the book because this is important. So on page 466 in the text, it's read, huge rewards were posted for information leading to the capture of the usurper styling himself Aegon II, his daughter Jaehaera, his son Maelor, the false knights Willis Fell and Rickard Thorne, the Thorns from Game of Thrones, same family, and Larys Strong, the Clubfoot. So Larys with the 2 Kingsguard, Willis Fell and Rickard Thorne, who may or may not be in season 2 on Aegon's side, basically help Aegon and his kids escape. And I honestly think that's going to be a pretty sick scene to see. I think it's going to be like one of those low-key, really good scenes. I think he's going to like use some Varys action. But let's get into his differences. Has a more personal, spelled out relationship with Alicent in the book. There's almost nothing written about them really communicating besides the Green Council. Larys was at the Green Council, so that is a difference that I'm seeing in point 2 as well. He's a much bigger factor in general. Like in the books, in the show, you don't even see him as much. Like in the books, he's a much bigger role, just generally for the Greens at this point, and like where we're at, much bigger role. And it is clear and evident that Larys kills his brother and father in the show, and in the books it is up to the reader. So I have that quote for you on page 383, the murder of Harwin and Lionel. The cause of the fire was never determined. Some put it down to be a simple mischance. Others have put forth the notion that Larys Clubfoot might have been responsible. With the with the father and his elder brother dead, Larys Strong became the Lord of Harrenhal. So they pretty much point that out in the books that, or in the show, excuse me, that it is very, very obvious that Larys killed his father and brother because he's pretty much evil. And there's nothing about it other than to say than that he really is evil. And another point I want to talk about Laris before we move on to Helena and Darren and close it out. Laris, and it's been said by many other YouTubers, so I'm not going to claim this is mine, but Laris is kind of a combination of like Littlefinger and Varys. Like he really is. Like George intentionally, I think, did that. He's like Varys in the sense that he is like uses disguises. Some people don't even I think he actually has a clubfoot that he just fakes that so he can disguise himself better. So he's like Varys and he is whisper and he's like the master of whispers like Varys, but he's also like Littlefinger because he's more politically focused, conniving, and evil. So he really is essentially a combination of Littlefinger and Varys. He really is. But let's get into Helena. So Helena Targaryen, she's one of the saddest characters you're going to see in the book. I'm going to have to spoil it because you're going to see it right away in season 2, and after that, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, you're going to. It's really sad. She's a really sad character. I would argue she's one of the saddest characters that I've really like read in entire of the Targaryen family. Maybe not of entire Song of Ice and Fire. That might be a little extreme, but pretty brutal what happens to her. Anyways, she's seemingly distant from the rest of her family and the rest of Team Green. And I quote here beside, or I put here besides maybe Aemon, because I side note real fast, I'm one of those believers that Aemon and Helena actually hooked up, and all of Aegon's kids are Aemon's because I think they're actually into each other. Where Aegon, I think, just sleeps around and doesn't really care about Helena. So I believe in that theory. That is a theory that Aegon's kids are actually Aemon's. So a lot of incest going on there, folks. But and it's also pretty clear and evident that in the book she has some, and the show, she has some form of social anxiety disorder. I'm not going to diagnose her, but there's something, she has some social anxiety disorder. There's not much else to say about that. And she bonded with, at a young age, and rides Dreamfire. I'll get into a quote about Dreamfire. Dreamfire has some history with her. She's a pretty cool dragon. She's a she dragon, definitely a pretty cool dragon. And it's cool because Helena rides Dreamfire, and she's a dragon dreamer. And another fun fact about Dreamfire, she's only been ridden by female Targaryens, never a male Targaryen. And a season 2 prediction, and it's extremely implied from the trailer. Episode 1, which is entitled "We Know a Son for a Son," will be very similar to the events what happens in the book, probably almost identical. And that is called "Where Blood and Cheese," two people from the City Watch hired by Daemon after Lucerys' death go and murder one of Helena's kids. I won't say which one, but in the few slides before this, you actually heard me. You'll basically be able to know which one it is, but I won't tell you directly. But yeah, that scene will be probably pretty red wedding-ish, everyone. So get ready. Like I'm telling you right now, and you're still going to be shocked. I'm going to be shocked. It's going to be violent and brutal. But let's get into some differences. So she is a dragon dreamer. She's a dragon dreamer in the show. Beast Beneath the Boards and a Spool of Greens and Blacks, and I have a cool analysis on that. The Spool of Greens and Blacks, I mean, it's pretty obvious, but I'd still like to share it with everyone. And the show gives her much more character than the books. That's the best I can speak to it. She's just more described out in the books. Like she's a dragon, excuse me, in the show. In the books, she's like, there's barely anything written about her, if I'm being totally honest, at this point where we're at. But so the quote, "The hand turns loom, spool of green, spool of black, dragons of flesh, weaving dragons of thread." So that's seen in season 1, episode 7, when Helena's like playing with a spider at Driftmark, and Aegon and Aemon are like, "What the heck is going on?" And Aemon's like crushing on her, and Aegon's like, "This my sister's weird, not to marry her." So basically, what this quote means is, again, the hand turns loom. So the hand is auto plotting, and the spools of green and black refer to the warring factions, which is pretty obvious. And the dragons of flesh are the little dragons, and the factions will bring in, and the factions that will be brought into war, with the dragons of thread representing the warring factions banner. So it's pretty cool. You're gonna see in my next video. The Aegon has a different banner than Rhaenyra, so that's what she's referring to. But basically, Helena, like in the show, is just like telling them future events, and none of them are like listening to her, recognizing them. So it's just like maybe listen to Helena. She's basically predicting the future. But those are the major similarities and differences with Helena between Fire and Blood and House of the Dragon. Finally, we're gonna get into Daeron Targaryen, who as you guys all know, I love Daeron Targaryen. It's because there's very little written about him, but it's basically just like he's a badass that was Daeron, that was like kind, and like he's basically, other than Helena and maybe Alicent, since she's a little different on the show, he's the only one on Team Green. I swear, I guarantee this, folks, that you'll be able to cheer for. Like you'll be able to root for this. It almost makes me like Team Green equally as Team Black because Daeron is awesome. So for Daeron, I didn't do uh similarities and differences because we don't even know Daeron yet. We're not going to see Daeron until season 3, which I don't totally understand how they're going to do that because he's supposed to be in a battle like in the middle of season 2. So I guess they're just going to really rework the events there. But so I did more of an analysis with Daeron. As you can see, him and his badass dragon Viserion. Viserion is a she dragon. That's a fun fact. So he was raised alongside Jacaerys in King's Landing when they were babies. I thought that was a cool fact to share with you guys. So on page 374, it said in the book, Queen Alicent also went into labor, delivering Viserys his third son, Daeron, whose coloring, unlike that of Jace, so Daeron has Targaryen hair, testified to his dragon blood. By royal command, the infants Jacaerys Velaryon and Daeron Targaryen shared a wet nurse until they weaned. So they grew up together. Daeron and Jacaerys. I don't think we're ever going to see them together, unfortunately. If you know what I mean by that comment, I just implied something to do without directly telling you. I don't think we're ever going to see them together, but they were close when they were little. And so you see this in the show too. They did technically do this in the show, even though we don't see them. The Greens moved into Old Town for safekeeping and long-term strategy, and we know that Daeron's there because in episode 10, Daemon says we have 13 dragons to their 4, so who's the 4th? It's got to be Daeron's because Aegon and Helena's kids their dragons are too small, so he's not including them. So we know Daeron's going to be in it. And the Greens did do this for safekeeping. They wanted to keep another dragon in Old Town. I think that's at least my theory. There's nothing written about it, but that would make sense. I think we'd all agree on that. He was given a dragon egg in his cradle, like Jace. And again, they grew up with Vermax and Viserion when they were little. And then I believe it's never really stated in the book, but you could imply that Daeron moved to Old Town probably when he was like 7 or 8. And again, he's the most likable, admirable Green, in my opinion. Aegon III named his son after him, and many more Targaryen kings in the future named their sons after Daeron. So he's the first Daeron, and you're going to see a lot more in the future. You're going to see a Daeron in the Dunk and Egg series. Where else would you see a Daeron? I don't think they're gonna. You might see Daeron in the end of the show, like the baby, but I doubt it. And so Daeron will not be in season 2, but my season 3 prediction is he will be the savior of the battle at Honeyholt, and I have a pretty good quote for you. So on page 450 to 451 in Fire and Blood, defeat seemed imminent until a shadow swept across the battlefield and a terrible roar resounded overhead. A dragon had come. The dragon was Tessarion, the Blue Queen, Cobalt and Copper. On her back rode the youngest of Queen Alicent's 3 sons, Daeron Targaryen, 15, Lord Ormond's squire. That's Otto's brother. The arrival of Prince Daeron and his dragon reversed the tide of the battle. So basically, Daeron like won an entire battle for the Greens, and without Daeron coming in and winning this battle, the war might have been over much sooner. So I thought that was some good prediction to share with you.